Beneath the blazing Texas sun, traffic on Highway 83 came to a standstill, but not due to an accident. Instead, a small, spirited bobcat kitten had halted the flow of vehicles, determined to make its presence known. Officer Sarah Winters had encountered her fair share of unusual calls, but this one was unlike any other. As she approached the trembling little creature, she realized it wasn't merely lost or hurt, it was trying to communicate. The glint of metal on its leg hinted at a deeper mystery waiting to be unraveled. What could this wild bobcat be leading them to, and why did it seem to be seeking assistance? What began as a routine patrol would soon reveal a life-or-death enigma that no one anticipated. Before we dive in, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the notification bell so you won't miss any new stories. The summer sun beat down on Highway 883 in the West Texas countryside, creating shimmering mirages on the asphalt that stretched endlessly. Traffic flowed steadily, the usual mix of trucks and cars heading north toward Abilene or south to San Angelo, with passengers unaware of the drama unfolding on the roadside. Officer Sarah Winters adjusted her Stetson against the glare, squinting at the dispatch notes on her cruiser screen. At 34, she had been with the Texas Department of Public Safety for 11 years, and wildlife calls rarely demanded immediate attention. Yet, something about this one felt different. Reports of a small, aggressive animal causing traffic disruptions were not something she could overlook. DPS. This is Unit 247 responding to the wildlife incident at Highway 83, mile marker 143. ETA 3 minutes, she reported, easing off the accelerator as she neared the scene. Roger that, Officer Winters. Be advised, we've received additional calls from motorists reporting what appears to be a juvenile bobcat displaying unusual behavior. Sarah's interest piqued. In her experience, animals typically fled from highways, not toward them. Something was amiss. She spotted the commotion before reaching the mile marker. A cluster of vehicles pulled over, drivers standing outside, pointing and snapping photos with their phones. With practiced efficiency, Sarah parked behind the last vehicle, lights flashing to warn oncoming traffic of the hazard ahead. As she stepped out of her cruiser, the hot Texas air hit her like a wall. She adjusted her utility belt and approached. A middle-aged man in a faded Dallas Cowboys t-shirt who seemed to be directing others to stay back. Good afternoon, sir. Officer Sarah Winters, DPS. Can you tell me what's going on? The man wiped sweat from his brow. Ma'am, there's a baby bobcat over yonder, he said, pointing toward the median. It's been trying to cross for about 20 minutes now. Runs out, then retreats. Almost caused a pileup when a semi had to brake hard to avoid it. Sarah nodded, her trained eyes scanning the area. Has anyone tried to approach it? No, ma'am. Wild animal and all. Plus, he hesitated. It seems distressed, like it's trying to get our attention or something. Never seen anything like it. Sarah thanked the man and carefully walked toward the median, her hand instinctively resting on her holster. She had dealt with injured wildlife before, and a wounded predator, even a young one, could be unpredictable. Then she saw it, a small bobcat kitten, no more than a few months old, its spotted coat dusty from the roadside. It paced nervously, at the edge of the median, making small darting movements toward the roadway before retreating when vehicles approached. Sarah kept her distance, observing. There was something off about its behavior. This wasn't an animal randomly crossing a road. It seemed deliberate, almost frantic in its attempts. She raised her binoculars for a closer look, and that's when she noticed it. A small device attached to the cat's hind leg, with what appeared to be a blue marker of some kind. The bobcat wasn't entirely wild. Sarah retreated to her cruiser and called the Regional Fish and Wildlife Office. Within 20 minutes, a white pickup truck with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department logo pulled up behind her cruiser. Dr. Stephen Mitchell emerged, a wiry man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and keen eyes that missed nothing. He had been the regional wildlife biologist for over 2 decades, and if anyone could make sense of this, it would be him. Dr. Mitchell, Sarah extended her hand. I appreciate you coming out so quickly. Call me Stephen, he replied, shaking her hand firmly. Dispatch mentioned a tagged bobcat. That's unusual enough to get me moving. Sarah briefed him as they walked toward the median. careful to keep their movements slow and non-threatening. "There," she pointed. "See the device on its leg?" Stephen raised his binoculars, adjusting the focus. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "That's not one of ours." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "Wildlife Services uses specific tracking collars, usually around the neck. This is something different," he continued, observing closely. "There's a blue marker attached. It almost looks like—" He trailed off, his brow furrowing. The bobcat spotted them and, instead of running away, moved closer, stopping about 30 feet from them. It made a small, urgent sound, then turned and took a few steps toward the forest bordering the highway, looking back at them. "It wants us to follow it," Stephen said, amazement in his voice. "Like Lassie," Sarah said skeptically. "I know how it sounds, but I've worked with wildlife for 25 years, and I've never seen a wild bobcat behave like this." He squinted at the blue marker. "That tag, can I borrow your binoculars? Mine aren't as powerful." Sarah handed them over, and Stephen focused intently on the device. "There's a number on it, RW7734. His face paled slightly. "Sarah, that's not a wildlife tag. That's an emergency location marker usually issued to hikers in certain parks." "Why would a bobcat have a hiker's location marker?" she asked, puzzled. "Good question. Let me make a call." Stephen retreated to his truck, returning 5 minutes later with a grave expression. "I just spoke with the ranger station at Fortress Ridge State Park. They've had a missing hiker since yesterday, Robert Whitley, 42, an experienced outdoorsman. He checked in for a 3-day solo hike but missed his scheduled check-in last night." Sarah's police instincts kicked in. The marker number matches RW, his initials, and 7734 was his campsite registration. They both looked at the bobcat, which was still waiting, occasionally making that same urgent sound. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah said. "How would a bobcat end up with a hiker's marker?" Stephen's expression was thoughtful. "There might be an explanation. Let me check something." He pulled out his tablet and tapped through several screens. "Here, ranger records show that Robert Whitley is a wildlife rehabilitator from Austin who specializes in big cats." Sarah looked at the bobcat with new understanding. "So this could be his rescue? Maybe he was tracking it as part of a rehabilitation program?" "It's possible, but if that's the case, why is the bobcat here and Robert isn't?" The implication hung between them. The bobcat made another sound, more insistent this time, and took several more steps toward the forest. Sarah made a decision. "I'm going to follow it. If there's any chance it knows where this hiker is, I'm coming with you." Stephen interrupted. "If Robert is injured, we might need medical supplies." He hurried back to his truck and returned with a backpack containing basic first aid, water, and emergency rations, a standard search and rescue kit. Sarah radioed dispatch to update them on the situation and request backup. "We've got a potential missing persons case connected to the wildlife incident. Dr. Mitchell and I are going to investigate. Requesting additional units in search and rescue on standby." "Copy that, Officer Winters. Be advised, nearest backup is 30 minutes out. Search and rescue has been notified, but will stage until you confirm." "Understood. We'll proceed with caution and maintain radio contact." The bobcat, seeming to sense their decision, turned and trotted toward the tree line, looking back periodically to ensure they were following. "Never thought I'd be following a bobcat into the woods," Sarah muttered as they crossed the highway, directing the bystanders to clear the area. "Nature has a way of surprising us," Stephen replied, "especially when humans get involved." As they entered the forest, the temperature dropped noticeably under the canopy of oak and juniper trees. The bobcat stayed about 50 feet ahead, visible enough to follow but maintaining its distance. "It's staying on a clear path," Stephen observed. "That's another sign this isn't typical behavior. Wild bobcats, even partially rehabilitated, ones would use more cover." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. "There," she pointed. "Boot prints, recent ones." Stephen knelt to examine them. "Good eye. These are fresh, maybe a day old. Men's hiking boots, probably size 11 or 12. They continued following the Bobcat, which maintained its steady pace. About a mile into the forest, they came across a clearing where the undergrowth had been disturbed. Broken branches, flattened grass, and scattered personal items. A water bottle, a torn backpack strap, and most concerning, spots of what appeared to be dried blood on several leaves. "Someone passed through here in a hurry," Sarah said, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. "Or fell," Stephen added, pointing to a steep drop-off at the edge of the clearing that hadn't been immediately visible. The Bobcat had, stopped at this point, pacing anxiously and making that same urgent sound they'd heard earlier. It approached the edge of the drop-off, then looked back at them expectantly. Sarah and Stephen exchanged glances, then carefully made their way to the edge. Below was a ravine about 30 feet deep, with a small stream running along its bottom, and there, partially concealed by a fallen tree, was a human form. "Robert!" Stephen called out. "Robert Whitley!" The figure moved slightly, raising an arm in what might have been a wave. "He's alive!" Sarah said with relief. She quickly radioed dispatch. "We've located the missing hiker in a ravine approximately 1 mile east of Highway 83 at mile marker 143. Subject is alive, but injured. Requesting immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that, Officer Winters. Search and rescue is mobilizing. ETA 45 minutes to your location." Sarah assessed the ravine. "It's not too steep. We can make it down there." "I'll go first," Stephen said. "I've got the medical supplies." They carefully made their way down the slope, using trees and rocks for support. The Bobcat surprised them by finding its own path down, moving with the natural agility of its species. When they reached the bottom, they found Robert Whitley conscious but clearly in distress. His leg was trapped under the fallen tree, and his face was pale from exposure and dehydration. But when he saw the Bobcat approach, a weak smile crossed his face. "Nova," he whispered. "Good girl." The Bobcat Nova approached cautiously and nuzzled against Robert's outstretched hand. Stephen immediately set to work examining Robert while Sarah provided water and radioed in more detailed information about his condition. "Compound fracture of the right tibia, possible concussion, dehydration," Stephen reported, "but stable." "Robert, can you tell us what happened?" Robert took a shaky breath. "I was tracking Nova. She's part of my rehabilitation program, ready for her final wilderness assessment before release." He paused, wincing in pain. "We were doing well until yesterday evening. There was a sudden storm, lightning struck. A tree nearby. Nova bolted, which is natural, but the same lightning weakened this tree." He gestured weakly to his trapped leg. "I was following her trail when it fell. I couldn't reach my emergency beacon, so I attached my location marker to Nova's tracking harness and told her to find help." Sarah and Stephen exchanged astonished looks. "You trained a Bobcat to find help?" Sarah asked incredulously. Robert managed a small laugh that turned into a grimace. "Not exactly. Nova was found as a very young kitten, raised around humans, before I got her. Part of her rehabilitation was learning that roads mean humans. When she's frightened, she still associates roads with safety." His voice filled with pride. "I wasn't sure it would work, but I hoped she'd go to the road and someone would notice her tag." Nova had settled next to Robert, her spotted body pressed against his side, watching the newcomers with cautious eyes. "That's incredible," Stephen said, applying a splint to Robert's leg. "You essentially improvised an animal search and rescue." "I had faith in her," Robert said simply. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The search and rescue team arrived with proper medical equipment and a stretcher designed for ravine extractions. As they worked to free Robert's leg from under the tree, Nova remained nearby, watchful, but not interfering. Sarah found herself fascinated by the bond between man and animal. It defied everything she thought she knew about wildlife. As the rescue team prepared to transport Robert, he called out weakly, "Nova, please, someone needs to look after her. She's not ready for full release yet." Stephen stepped forward. "I'll take personal responsibility for her until you're back on your feet, Robert. You have my word." Relief washed over Robert's face as he was lifted onto the stretcher. "Thank you," he whispered. "Her carrier and supplies are at my campsite, Fortress Ridge, Site 7734. "We'll find it," Stephen assured him. As Robert was being carried up the ravine, Nova tried to follow, making small distress sounds. Sarah, acting on instinct, knelt down to the Bobcat's level. "It's okay, girl. He's going to be all right. And you did good. Real good." Nova regarded her with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than any wild animal should. The story of Robert Whitley and Nova the Bobcat made local headlines the next day. "Man's life saved by Bobcat companion." Interest spread quickly, with national news outlets picking up the heartwarming tale of an animal rehabilitator rescued by the very creature he was preparing to return to the wild. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself driving to the Austin Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where Robert worked. She hadn't been able to shake the story from her mind, and when her sergeant suggested she do a follow-up as part of their community outreach program, she eagerly volunteered. The center was situated on 20 acres of land outside Austin, featuring a series of modern buildings surrounded by large naturalistic enclosures. Sarah was greeted by a young volunteer who led her to a sunny room where Robert Whitley sat in a wheelchair, his casted leg propped up on a stool. "Officer Winters," he smiled, extending his hand. "It's good to finally meet you properly. Last time I was a bit indisposed." Sarah laughed, shaking his hand. "Call me Sarah, please. And you were handling a compound fracture better than most people handle a paper cut." "Adrenaline is a wonderful thing," Robert chuckled, and knowing Nova succeeded, that was better than any painkiller. "How is she?" Sarah asked. Robert's face lit up. "Why don't you see for yourself? We're about to do her afternoon training session." He wheeled himself out to a large enclosure where Dr. Mitchell was already waiting. Sarah was surprised to see him there. "Stephen's been coming down twice a week to help with Nova," Robert explained, noting her expression. "He's never seen anything like her and wants to document her rehabilitation process for a research paper." "Stephen," he greeted them warmly. "Sarah, good to see you again. You're just in time for the show." Inside the enclosure, Nova was exploring, her movements graceful and precise. She had grown noticeably in the weeks since Sarah had last seen her, her kitten proportions giving way to the more defined musculature of adolescence. "She's getting big," Sarah observed. "They grow quickly at this stage," Robert said proudly, "and she's thriving. The experience hasn't seemed to set back her rehabilitation. If anything, it's given us new insights into her cognitive abilities." Stephen opened a small gate, and they entered a protected observation area within the enclosure. Nova immediately noticed them and approached, focusing particularly on Sarah. "She remembers you," Robert said with surprise. "Is that unusual?" Sarah asked. "Very. Bobcats generally don't differentiate between humans unless they've had extensive contact, but Nova seems to recognize you specifically." Sarah felt a strange sense of connection as the Bobcat regarded her with those intent golden eyes. "What happens to her now?" she asked. Robert exchanged a glance with Stephen. "That's actually become a complex question. Nova's case has challenged some of our assumptions about rehabilitation. Her ability to navigate between wild instincts and human interaction is unique. The traditional approach would be to minimize human contact and eventually release her back into the wild," Stephen added. "But given her demonstrated capability, several researchers, including myself, have proposed an alternative." Robert wheeled himself closer to the enclosure fence. "We're developing a new program, wildlife ambassadors, animals that, for various reasons, occupy a space between wild and domesticated. They can teach us about their species while helping with conservation education, and Nova would be your first ambassador," Sarah guessed. "She's a perfect candidate," Robert confirmed. "She has wild instincts but has formed selective bonds with humans, and after her role in the rescue, the public is already invested in her story." They watched as Nova investigated a series of enrichment puzzles placed around the enclosure, demonstrating problem-solving skills that impressed even Sarah's untrained eye. "The rescue wasn't just a lucky coincidence, was it?" Sarah asked. "You really did train her." Robert shook his head. Not in the way most people assume. You can't train a bobcat like a dog. What I did was work with her natural instincts and create associations. Roads mean humans. Humans mean help when distressed. The tracking device means me. He smiled ruefully. I honestly didn't know if it would work. It was a desperate attempt. Well, it saved your life, Sarah said, and changed hers. Robert added softly, the publicity from the rescue has brought in enough donations to fund our ambassador program for the next 3 years. We're building a special facility where visitors can learn about native Texas wildlife through animals, like Nova, who can't be fully released. Speaking of publicity, Stephen interjected, the governor's office called this morning. They want to present both of you with a special commendation at the State Conservation Gala next month. Robert looked embarrassed. I told them Nova deserves the award, not me. I believe their exact response was that they don't have a protocol for giving state honors to bobcats, Stephen laughed. But they are using Nova's image on a new wildlife conservation license plate, so there's that. Sarah smiled, remembering the small, desperate bobcat that had blocked traffic on Highway 83 just a few weeks ago. Who could have imagined that such a creature would save a life and potentially change how people viewed the relationship between humans and wildlife? As if sensing her thoughts, Nova approached the fence where Sarah stood, making a soft chirping sound that seemed almost like a greeting. Would you like to feed her? Robert asked, offering Sarah a pair of long tongs with a piece of meat, secured at the end. Sarah hesitated, then accepted the tongs. Under Robert's guidance, she extended the meat through a small feeding port. Nova took it delicately without any aggression, then sat and calmly ate while watching Sarah with those intelligent eyes. I never thought I'd be this close to a wild bobcat, Sarah admitted. She's teaching us that wild isn't as simple, a concept as we once thought, Robert said. There's a spectrum of behaviors and adaptations. Nova is helping us understand that the line between wild and tame isn't as clear-cut as we imagined. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the crowd at the grand opening of the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center. Her department had assigned her as their official representative, but she would have attended anyway. She needed to see how Nova's story had evolved. The center was impressive, with naturalistic habitats designed to give the animals space while still allowing visitors to observe them. Educational displays explained the unique circumstances that had brought each animal to the ambassador program. Injuries that prevented release, imprinting that made wild living impossible, or in Nova's case, exceptional cognitive development that created a unique bridge between wild and human worlds. Nova's habitat was the centerpiece of the facility, a spacious enclosure with rocks, trees, and a small stream designed to mimic her natural environment while allowing her to interact with researchers and participate in educational programs. Robert, now fully recovered, led the ribbon-cutting ceremony, sharing Nova's story with the assembled crowd and media. When he mentioned Sarah's role in the rescue, he insisted she join him at the podium. Officer Winters represented the best of human compassion that day, he told the crowd. She didn't dismiss a mere animal as unimportant. She recognized intelligence and intent, even when it came in an unexpected form. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed to tour the facility, Robert took Sarah to a special observation area where they could see Nova up close. She's become quite the celebrity, Sarah observed as the bobcat lounged regally on a rock outcropping, seemingly unbothered by the admiring visitors. Yes, but more importantly, she's becoming an ambassador for her species, Robert said. People who see her, who hear her story, they're donating to conservation efforts, supporting habitat preservation. His voice filled with quiet pride. One bobcat has done more for Texas wildlife conservation in 6 months than a decade of traditional campaigns. Sarah watched as Nova stretched and repositioned herself, those intelligent eyes scanning the visitors before settling briefly on Sarah with what almost seemed like recognition. Do you ever wonder what she's thinking? Sarah asked. Robert smiled. Every day. But I've learned to respect the mystery. Nova reminds us that animals aren't just simplified versions of humans. They're different, complex in their own ways. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the center, Sarah found herself reflecting on how a routine call about an animal disrupting traffic had cascaded into something that changed so many lives: Robert's, Nova's, her own, and now potentially thousands of visitors who would come to learn about the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. "You know," she said finally, "in 11 years of police work, I've never had a case quite like this one." "I should hope not," Robert laughed. "Once in a lifetime is enough for me." They watched in comfortable silence as Nova, the bobcat who had once desperately tried to get human attention on a busy highway, now commanded it effortlessly. Her very presence was a testament to the unexpected ways that humans and animals could impact each other's lives. In the fading light, as visitors reluctantly began to leave, Nova rose from her perch and approached the observation glass where Sarah stood. For a moment, those golden eyes met hers, and Sarah felt again that inexplicable connection, a bridge between two worlds, wild and human, each with lessons to teach the other.